Yes, hello and welcome to today's webinar from Salesfusion entitled Webinar B2B Marketing Metrics That Matter. My name is Kevin Miller. It's my pleasure to present to everybody today. Today's session will last approximately 30 to 35 minutes. There will be time for questions at the end of the session. How you do that is you ask a question using the GoToWebinar panel. We will read your question out loud. We won't read your name and company, but we will do our best to answer questions in a timely fashion. If we don't get to your question at the end of the session, we will follow up with a direct email and a response to your question. Today's session will be recorded and made available as an on-demand session following today's webinar that is typically available in about 24 to 48 hours, as well as a copy of the slides. So with that, let's go ahead and stay on time, and we will get our session kicked off. So I want to go over a few things that we're going to cover in today's session on the marketing analytics side, living well in the age of big data, some select metrics that we can use to help establish credibility with the C-suite and the board, how we justify our marketing spend today, and how we can make better decisions about marketing programs in general. And then ultimately want to talk a little bit about how we can find a perfect buyer using some of the new technologies that we have available, as well as some process management integration that we're doing in marketing with our sales team. So briefly, the era of big data for B2B marketing is upon us, and big data is kind of the new hot term that a lot of folks are using. I want to define what big data means relative to B2B marketers. We're not talking about big data from the retail marketing perspective where we're dealing with terabytes worth of data on a day in and day out basis. What we're doing is we're dealing with data from different sources today. And those sources can be coming from our CRM system. Those sources could be coming from the web. They could be coming from social, etc. These new data sources that we're using in B2B marketing, they definitely present some great opportunities for us to measure new things and become more accurate in how we pinpoint where our spend is going, how we can do some very meaningful analysis about the volume, type, and disposition of leads that we're capturing and passing over to sales. But it also presents us with a number of challenges, not the least of which is that this is a newer type of data that we're dealing with. And by that, the side effect is not a lot of people have experience dealing with these types of data sets. So it's important for folks to first understand, where is data coming from that we're going to use in our analytics, and what does it mean? How can we bring data in from the web, combine that with data in CRM or lead scoring data or lead disposition data or demographic data? How can we combine that to create profiles of buyers based on real history? So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. There's been an exponential increase in data volume. I would say a lot of that is attributable to social and web. And even on the social side of the fence, there's data that we really just don't have our heads around just yet. We're getting better at it, but we're still not quite there. We need to understand, of all the data that we're capturing from campaigns and from the web and from social, what's important and what's not, what's just noise, and ultimately which data sets can lead us to making key decisions about how to run our business. Now, the one thing I want to stress with everybody is that the data that we have access to is no longer one-dimensional. Meaning we're not dealing simply with click-through data from online advertising or open-click data on email marketing or pure web analytics data from Google Analytics or pure demographic data that might be coming over from our CRM system. And there's a certain amount of danger associated with relying too heavily on one-dimensional data. Now, our friends at Adobe have produced a bunch of commercials last year, and I thought one of them really nailed the whole notion of what can happen in a rather exaggerated fashion when you deal solely with one-dimensional data. So I'll give a nod to our friends at Adobe and a great representation of what they did in talking about relying too heavily on one-dimensional data, and I think you'll get the point. So we'll go ahead and play this. So there's obviously a funny representation of what can happen when we're dealing with one-dimensional data. There's definitely some risk associated with it. I hope the audio came through very clearly on that, but obviously, kind of the humorous representation there had to do with looking at one piece of information. In the case of the encyclopedia example, we were obviously looking at basically just click-through data, which isn't going to cut it. So moving forward through the presentation, taming the fire hose, right? So we talk a lot about just really big sets of data that we're dealing with today. So firstly, we want to understand where the data is coming from and which pieces of that data are we ultimately going to use in creating meaningful analytics that we can present to our management, that we can present to our C-suite, our CFO, our CEO, and that we can also present to our board of directors. Firstly, website visitor data. So website visitor data is a new class of data, new in the sense that we're dealing with really the last 3 to 5 years where people have started to adopt this information. And if I can just take a moment and explain to folks what type of data we're talking about when we're talking about website visitor data. What I want to do is take a moment and switch over from one system to another. I'm going to go ahead and log into an application here a second, and we want to go in and just explain to everybody what website visitor tracking data is all about. Essentially, what website visitor tracking data does is through JavaScript that exists either in your emails or on your landing pages or directly on your website, you are able to place a first-party cookie on the machine of a person who's visiting your website. You are going to have several types of visitors who are going to hit your website. And I want to make a quick notation for the folks that joined late. A copy of this will be made available, a copy of the slides will be made available, and we will take questions at the end of the session. Because I know there's been quite a few questions have been popping up here. So I'm not ignoring you. I just want to let everybody know that we will tackle the questions when we get to the end. And yes, a copy of this will be made available. So website visitor data is predicated upon placing a first-party cookie on the machine of a person who's either clicking through an email or clicking on a landing page. This is different data than Google Analytics. So when we talk about big data sets on web analytics data, we're not talking about Google Analytics data. Google Analytics data is very limited in what it can tell a B2B marketer. It's important, but very limited. The type of information that we're gathering in website visitor tracking is this type of information where we are identifying down to the person level who's coming to my website, how did they get there, and what did they do when they got to that website. In this case, I'm cookied, right? So it knows who Kevin Miller is, even though I'm at a Marriott. I'm not in my office right now. It still is able to identify me to the machine level through my IP address. And essentially what it's doing is it's telling me what I'm looking at. And you can see here, this was the video that we just watched, which was essentially embedded in what we call one of our dialogues. It's essentially allowed the company to identify to the person level who's come on the website and what have they done. Now, we also identify companies. So here we have Forrester Research is on our website today. We don't know who the person is from Forrester, but we know it's Forrester Research because we've done a reverse IP append, and we know that Forrester owns that IP. We don't know who the person is yet, but we may be able to find that out later on if the same person comes back and fills out a form, etc. The type of information that we're gathering from website visitor tracking is voluminous in nature. But it's one of the key pieces of information that we are able to gather that we didn't have previously, or we didn't have without marketing automation platforms like Salesfusion. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about, if we go back over into the PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to pre-apologize to everybody for the cold I have. There'll be a few sniffles in the background. Where data is coming from. So website visitor data. Email campaign data, no-brainer. We're sending out campaigns. We're getting opens. We're getting clicks. There's data that exists in CRM systems that's extremely valuable to marketers. Unfortunately, not enough marketers are doing a good job, and not enough companies are doing a good job, I should say. It's not the marketer's fault per se, in integrating their marketing data with CRM data. but that's changing. Applications like Salesfusion are built all around the concept of integrating marketing automation with CRM, so we can get those two different sets of data, the opportunity and lead disposition data, and I'll explain a little bit more detail about what we're talking about there, and combining that with the actual lead gen data that we're gathering from the marketing system. Other sources of data, forms, surveys, landing pages, social media is starting to generate some meaningful data. Data appending services. Are we going out and using things like net prospects or inside view to append data to our databases? And typically you're looking at demographic data in those cases. Oftentimes that data is meant to assist in properly pre-qualifying leads using a lead scoring model. But again, we want to be cautious. It's one-dimensional data. Demographic data is one-dimensional data. So we don't want to place too much weight on its value, but it does have value in the grand scheme of things. Now, marketing analytics in general are changing, and I can tell you, as somebody who's got quite a bit of gray on the top of their head and has been involved in direct marketing since the early 90s, the type of data that I looked at when I looked after large consumer promotions in the mid-90s is vastly different than the type of data we look at today. We were very much focused on transactional campaign data, whereas today, especially on the B2B side of the fence, we really care about revenue cycle management or revenue cycle data. And you'll even hear, like Forrester just did a wave report that included us on it, where they actually classified the marketing systems that they profiled as lead to revenue management systems. So some of the analysts in the industry, like a Forrester, believe, and we happen to agree with them, that the output of the marketing automation systems like Salesfusion is very revenue-driven, revenue-centric. And the way people buy today, the way people evaluate products online, and they self-evaluate so deep into the sales cycle today, places a much higher burden on marketing to report on a sales funnel than they've had to in the past. So marketing back in the day, you know, we could sit there and pull a report that says, hey, my click-through rate on landing pages this month was 17.5%. That's a 5% increase over last year. I'm doing a great job. I deserve a raise. Well, today, those numbers are virtually meaningless to anybody other than yourself who's running that. It's obviously nice to know that your conversion rate on a landing page has increased. That's great. That means you're capturing more leads, or you think you're capturing more leads. What's much more important is knowing what happens to those leads that you've captured once they get scored and moved into CRM. You know, people care much more about what are the SQL conversion rates, sales qualified lead conversion rates, than they do about open and click-through rates or form completion rates. I mean, those metrics are still interesting. They're interesting to the campaign manager. What's interesting to the company is what's happening to those leads after the fact and how much you spent to get those leads. Data has to originate from both sales and marketing. It simply isn't going to work, it being your ability to forecast revenue, your ability to present to the CFO to get additional funding. It's not going to work unless you've got both sides of data. Now, unfortunately, because marketing today is still using a lot of disparate point solutions. I've got an email tool, I've got a landing page tool, I've got a social publishing tool, I've got this tool, I've got that tool. You know, they all cost $15 a month, and I've cobbled them all together, and I live and die in spreadsheets now. That's still a very, very common way of life for a lot of marketers. It's changing, fortunately. I mean, there's solutions like Salesfusion and others out there that have these great marketing automation platforms where a lot of those different disparate functions like email marketing and landing pages are in one solution now, but the real value add to that is that all the data is in one place, and then we're able to feed that data directly into the CRM and then pull data back out of the CRM. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Marketing analytics today, I will tell you from every CMO that I speak to in the industry, and that's a lot of them, all they care about is leads moving through a funnel. And it's funny because it's almost like the CMOs are reporting on things that the VP of sales have historically reported on. But today, marketing has so much stake in the funnel, such a deep stake in the funnel today than they've had in the past, that their reports look like sales reports. Analytics is oftentimes going to be presented in layers, right? So we've got our C-level reports, we've got our sales reports, we've got our marketing management reports. Analytics are going to be both actionable for both marketing and sales, and I'll show an example of that, particularly on the sales side as we get towards the end of the discussion. So let's look at this from the perspective of a funnel. And as companies start to build out their metrics and their key performance indicators and their analytics, it's important to look at this, again, from the perspective of a funnel. And let me take a moment to sidebar this and explain exactly why. Today, particularly in B2B, the average buyer can self-sell themselves as much as 70% through a cycle. This was a study that was done by Serious Decisions, an analyst firm. As much as 70% of a sales cycle is complete by the time a prospect connects with one of your salespeople, meaning they've done all of the discovery and evaluation online with all the content that we push out to the web today. I mean, you think about all the different stuff we're pushing out to the web: blogs, our corporate website, infographics, white papers, articles, press releases, a myriad of content we're pushing out in the hopes that people will find it, read it, like us, come into our site, engage, and then engage with a sales rep. A lot of that stuff that's being done on the front end is oftentimes difficult to report on, especially if we're using point solutions, okay? Now, who cares about what in this overall funnel? Marketing cares about volume. Marketing wants to get as many people as they possibly can to read their stuff, download their stuff, engage with their stuff, and ultimately wind up on the homepage of the website. That's what marketing cares about. Sales, what do they care about? Value. Sales does not want lists of thousands and thousands of people who've opened and clicked. They want a list of 100 people that are quote-unquote pre-qualified. Because how sales operates is they operate with a quota. They've got near-term objectives, and they want to focus all of their attention on only those people that have the propensity, capacity, and desire to buy, right? So marketing has to go out and do a lot of stuff, generate a lot of volume to find that smaller number of people who are of value, who will ultimately make their way down the sales funnel till they get to the opportunity stage. Now you're at the level of what the C-level cares about. Your CFO, your CSO, your CMO, your CEO, the board of directors. They care about your pipeline, your sales pipeline, the number of opportunities converting to customers. What is predictability, okay, of what we can put in the top of the funnel and predict what's going to come out the bottom of the funnel. We've got years and years of CRM systems that have been gathering data for years and years and years. We should have reasonable metrics around close rates at opportunity stage, meaning if I'm at demonstration stage, I know I've got an average over the last 3 years of a 45% close rate. Right? What we haven't known, or what we haven't had our handle on, is how many marketing qualified / sales qualified leads does it take to get to the number of opportunities I need at a close rate of 45% to meet or exceed my number, right? So that's been the missing piece, that top of the funnel. But now marketing is in there, generating leads, pushing them into the funnel, tracking and measuring them as they go down through that marketing qualified, sales qualified status. And everybody's kind of coming together at once. And it's really kind of interesting to watch. So let's talk a little bit about how analytics help the marketer. First and foremost, campaign optimization. So we'll work from the bottom up. Marketers need to know what's working and what's not working, and they need to be able to make real-time adjustments. So it's super important in dashboards, and in alerts, and in email reports that marketing is continuously getting analytics on what's working and what's not. This is a very real-time world that we operate in. This is not executing a direct mail campaign in 1994 where you're not going to get your first real round of metrics back for 6 weeks. This is, I'm going to start getting metrics back in 6 minutes, and I may be making adjustments on the fly. So campaign optimization is first. Then we move to justification of spend. So the other analytics that we're going to be getting, now these analytics are obviously going to take a little bit of a longer period of time, but let me explain to you how we can kind of shortcut that. Justification of spend. Now, I mentioned before that most CRM systems, if they've been deployed a while, should give sales a reasonably good understanding of what your close rates are at certain stages of a sales cycle. If everybody on the phone right now is all 100% marketing people, forgive me, I'm not talking down to you because I'm a marketer as well, but oftentimes marketers may not understand what's happening inside of a sales cycle. When you open up an opportunity in a CRM system, you're going to have set stages that have percentage close rates. Stage 1 would be, opportunity begin, and that has a close rate of 10%, meaning I've got a 10% chance of closing the deal at this stage. Now, let's say the next stage is presentation. I've gotten to the stage where I presented my solution to the customer prospect. My close rate at that stage is 25%, and then I've gotten to the next stage is present contract, and my close rate at that is 75%. Now, this is not new. Sales has been tracking this stuff for years in CRM systems, and they can usually, with reasonable accuracy, tell you if I've got 25 opportunities in stage 1, I'm going to close 10% of those within the next 30 days. Okay? So what that means is they can be relatively predictable in saying I'm going to generate this much revenue within the next 30 days. Okay? Now, that's an important thing that marketing needs to understand, because what marketing is doing today is they're pushing leads over into the CRM system through these marketing automation systems. If we can then pull opportunity stage data back, even in the earlier stages, we can say, okay, well, I've run a campaign. The campaign had 1,000 people fill out a form. Of those, 100 are what I call sales qualified lead, and I've moved those into CRM. Of those, 15 have become quote-unquote new opportunities at stage 1. I know I've got a historical close rate of 10% at stage 1. I further know that my average deal size is 10,000. Therefore, 10% of 100 opportunities is 10 times 10,000 is 100,000. Therefore, I've spent X dollars and I've generated $100,000 in predictable pipeline. So, marketing, you don't need to wait until the very end. You can do some predictive analytics if you have a CRM system in place and it's been in place for a while and you have those metrics from sales. So you can work together with sales to kind of shortcut, not have to wait till the deal closes per se and is in, it has been invoiced by finance in order to run your ROI report. You can be a little forward thinking in your ROI reporting. And that leads to spend optimization. Our campaigns are real time, but our sales cycles are long, right? If we're trying to make real-time adjustments, but we have to wait 3 months, which is the average sales cycle, then that's not too smart. So again, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about going to sales and getting a very rich set of history from them on what our close rates are at stages. Then all we need to know is how many opportunities are sitting at this stage, which came from this campaign. If we've generated 30% of our opportunities from this campaign, 50% from this campaign, and 0% from this campaign, well, I'm going to stop putting money into the 0% campaign. And there are certain metrics that we really need to be paying attention to as B2B marketers. We'll go over those in just so 5 metrics that we need to be paying attention to. Lead volume. How many new leads are we putting into the system? And typically this is going to be over a time period of a month. You could look at it as far out as a quarter. Most companies are looking month to month to month. The lead volume is going to be measured by the number of SQLs and number of MQLs. Now, a marketing qualified lead and a sales qualified lead. If you're not familiar with what these terms are, it's because these are just acronyms. Each company defines what an MQL and an SQL is through lead scoring models. So companies that are implementing marketing automation, one of the first things that they're doing after they master the basics, like sending emails and building landing pages, is they build a lead scoring model with the help of sales. And the lead scoring model will usually dictate what's an MQL, what's an SQL. An MQL is typically somebody that's been identified to the name email level and has taken one action, or a small number of actions, like they've opened an email, they've clicked an email, they've filled out a form, whatever. And SQL, and again, we'll go into this a little bit, has done many things which has led them to accumulate numeric scores, which then ultimately flags them as being somebody that we want sales to talk to immediately. So we push that lead to sales. The key metric, though, is the overall lead volume, and then what is your MQL to SQL ratio, right? So understanding how many MQLs does it take in a month to generate X number of SQLs. Now, you'll end up coming back to this number a little bit later on when we start to do how many SQLs are converting. So what is our close rate on SQLs? So once we know this number, right, how many SQLs are converting to opportunities, then we can go back and say, well, geez, now I know exactly how many MQLs I need to generate on any given month. If 10% of all my MQLs in any given month convert to SQL, and X% of SQLs convert to opportunities, you see where this is going, you can actually just sit down and say, okay, each month I've got to generate 375 SQLs, no matter what, in order to make my number, in order for my company to make my number. And then what you do is you start to use those campaign analytics that we were talking about, and then you start to say, okay, I know this campaign consistently produces, so we're going to put a lot of money into this campaign and take money away from these other campaigns. It's fun to actually see this in practice. It takes a while to get to this point. You have to be using both CRM and marketing automation for a time period and have them integrated in order to get to this point. But when you get to this point, marketing becomes a very mathematical exercise for a lot of companies. And it frees the marketers up to just being able to zero in on one thing, almost like salespeople do. You know, salespeople are very zeroed in on a number each month. I got to sell this. And it focuses them. Marketers have been very unfocused in the past because they've been just going after that volume. When you get mathematical like this, you really can start to zero in and focus and say, I need to get to 350 MQLs this month. I don't care how I do it. We're going to get to that number. And then you really kind of rally the team around that. And it almost starts to feel like how a sales team operates. It's a neat thing to see happen, and we've seen it with lots of our customers and internally, etc. Then we want to know time to close, obviously, from the date of capture to the opportunity close. The true sales cycle is not when the opportunity starts. The true sales cycle is when the lead raises their hand and becomes an MQL. You need to know that time period because then what you can start to look at is how far ahead do I have to plan my campaigns to generate enough MQLs. If I know the time to identify an MQL, to the time it transitions to an SQL, to the time that it transitions to sales and an opportunity, to the time the opportunity actually closes, if that is a 6-month period, then your marketing calendar and your planning calendar needs to take that into consideration. And then finally, what is the cost per lead? Every company needs to track this religiously, and unfortunately, not a lot of companies really do have a handle on this, mostly because the spend on marketing and the cost of a salesperson or the cost of selling are two completely different departmental metrics that rarely ever bump up against each other. There are ways that we can help this along with marketing automation. Certainly we can do a much better job in our marketing automation systems of tracking the costs on the marketing side of the fence. We can push those oftentimes into a campaign table inside a CRM, and then you can add sales costs to that. So there are some ways we can get to that. That's one of the more difficult metrics to get to. It's kind of the last one on there for a reason. So how do we measure lead volume? Firstly, what's an MQL? Typically, most companies would say someone who's been identified by the name and a company, not Kevin Miller at Gmail. It's Kevin.Miller at Salesfusion. There's been some action taken. There's been a web hit, a form has been completed, email's been opened. There's been something that, number one, validates that the email address is accurate. That person really is at that company. They have the type of title that we want to sell to. There's usually some demographic data associated with it. SQL, there's been repetitive actions taken over some time period. They've been to my website 5 times in a month. You look down here, it's a screenshot of our lead scoring model. There's things here like lifetime visit 25 pages. Like if you come and you hit my site, you look at 25 pages total, you're going to get a score. If you come to my site and you look at 5 unique pages, you're going to get a score. Right? So we're looking at repetitive actions. We'll then combine that with the demographic data, and we'll combine it with, of course, the behavioral data. And just so you know, a little lead scoring 101, this isn't the session to really get into lead scoring detail, but there's 2 types of behaviors that we track, implicit and explicit. The explicit data is opens, clicks, form completions, event attendance. Implicit data is coming to my website 6 times in a month. Right, so there's 2 types of behavioral data that we're talking about. Can you track all this if you don't have a marketing automation system, if you don't have lead scoring inside of a marketing automation system connected to your CRM? Sure. And you're going to be doing it for hours and hours on end each week in Excel. Chances are it's not going to be nearly as accurate. And there's a reason why companies didn't really do this before marketing automation systems existed, was because it's too hard, too manual, and not accurate enough. How do we measure things like revenue conversions, right? How do we do a lot of the things that we're talking about? Firstly, we have to connect 2 systems together. We've got to connect our CRM system, which is going to have opportunity data and converted contact data, with our marketing systems, which is going to have lead data, campaign data, and lead score history. Now, this is a push and pull between 2 systems, right? So the marketing system is usually going to push the lead data, the lead score, the lead source, the basic lead information that we've captured up to this point, push that over into CRM. Now, as sales gets a hold of that lead, converts it, opens an opportunity, and starts to work that lead, then we will pull back opportunity data and also lead and contact status data. Right? So the basic process that we see in almost all cases where we are connecting up to a CRM system is we push the SQL to CRM. We report on the number of SQLs versus MQLs in a time period. Sales converts a lead to a contact and an opportunity. Marketing pulls the contact opportunity data back, and then we match that up with the originating lead source and status. So we can say campaign A with a lead source of ABC123 was responsible for generating 65 SQLs this month, and then you start getting into some of those other metrics we talked about in the beginning, which is we then know that our close rate on SQLs is blah, 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 and we can start to do some revenue prediction. We have to get beyond the opening and the click, right? Marketers have to get away from patting themselves on the back when they generate lots and lots and lots and lots of volume. It's good. We want that. But what we really care about more than anything else is it driving downstream activity? When we look at email campaigns in Salesfusion, the metric that we typically look at is, are opening clicks driving traffic to our website? And are they driving repetitive traffic to our website? Meaning, are people clicking through the call to action in the email, and then are they coming back again and again and again? Those return visits after the original click are what we're keying in on, and we're driving nurture marketing off of that. The open and the click data is great. We need to know that. What we need to know more is, was that content good enough that it drew those people back to our site several days later? And this data is easy to get in a marketing automation platform. We have it because we've cooking them. We see that they've come to the website. There are some critical dependencies here as well. Optimizing on delivery of lists and segments. A/B testing for email campaigns and landing pages. How can we optimize our clicks and our opens, right? We can't have all those great SQLs if we don't have great performing campaigns. So at the campaign level, what we need to be doing is optimizing. This is the way I like to describe the analytics that we have in our system. They're all meant to optimize. We A/B test everything, or we test and we cross-reference segments and lists, like this snapshot of a report. Very common and popular report in our system. Whenever you're running campaigns, if we're running against multiple lists and segments, we could do quick comparisons. These numbers here are actually all the different segments in the system, and we're doing comparatives between open rates between different lists or different segments in our system to see which ones are performing better than others. This plays a couple of roles. If we're doing list acquisition and we have one particular vendor that we're buying lists from that's performing really well, we're going to buy from them again versus one that's not. If we have a certain segment, maybe we have a segment of near-term versus people that have been on our website within 30 days versus people that have been on our website within 90 days. And we want to look at what are the open rates of people that have been on our site within 30 days versus 90 days. So we start to then just optimize and tweak and like I like to say, adjust the bass and the treble of these campaigns. It's all about optimization. The critical dependency here is that we need all the info. We need the web data, the email data, the landing page data. We need it all in order to make this work. One of the other things that marketing is getting better at is justifying spend to the C-suite and to the board of directors. We're doing this because we're getting better at combining marketing and sales data. Once we connect the two systems up, once we start moving that opportunity data and lead data back and forth between the systems, we can walk into a boardroom confidently and say, we spent this and we generated this in revenue. Or we generated this in pipeline. You don't necessarily have to focus on closed revenue. Again, if you've got historical CRM data, sales will know that already. All we have to do is go and improve that we generated enough pipeline that if sales does their job and closes at the rates that they've closed at historically, then we'll be fine. The focus is on revenue-centric outcomes, not campaign-level metrics. We ensure data is presented, is sales validated, right? Does the data that we're saying jive with what sales is saying? Meaning if we say we generated $100,000 in pipeline, is that coming directly from our opportunities, and are those opportunities accurate, et cetera? So there always has to be some sales validation. And then ultimately, are we matching up the metrics with the defined sales funnel? Again, if we have 5 stages of our sales cycle, okay, we know the close rates are XXX throughout the cycle, are we then able to predict how many leads we need at each stage, or how many leads have we generated at each stage? When you have that kind of information, you walk into a CFO's office with it, you walk into a board's office with it, it's going to be much easier for you to get additional spend, additional resources, additional budgeting for whatever campaigns you're going to. How often have we seen, that decision? Well, we want to go to this trade show. Well, why? Well, because we always go to this trade show. Well, do we have any metrics that say that this trade show actually pays off? I want to go out and I want to place an ad on this website. Why? So to be able to better answer those questions is going to be a tremendous boon for the marketer. We can also work to find who the perfect buyer is with analytics. Using this lead scoring data we've talked a little bit about, and then matching it up with the opportunity data and even customer data from our CRM system, we could potentially match lead scoring profile history with customer lifetime value data. Again, we're assuming we have some of that information inside of our CRM systems. I hope you do, or some subset of it. Typically, this looks like engagement over time. So when we look at the analytics down to a person level, so what this is an example of a record, it's actually my record in a demo system that's been captured. This is a dashboard that's presented to salespeople. But what it's meant to show you is that we do capture historic activity. So we're looking at, for example, how many repetitive web visits this person has week in over week over the last 90 days. Combine that with the total number of email engagements they've had. Combine that with the total number of forms they've completed. What we can start to do, now that we have this historical baseline of data from different places, is combine that with the lead score profile and then the opportunity data that converts to customers. And if we can go back and say our average customer had this type of engagement with us 3 months before they bought, then what we could do is we could start to drive people towards that engagement path. Now, Forrester research did a webinar with these guys a ways back, and they said it very well. They said lead revenue management, marketing automation, and CRM integration, it's not about figuring out the right process and then putting 1,000 people into that process. It's figuring out what the right outcome is, and then systematically walking each person through the outcomes to get to that. And I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it. So we want to figure out, if these metrics here that I'm looking at on my screen, if these almost always result in somebody becoming a customer, then we have to go back and figure out, well, what did it take to get the person to get to look like this? It took a nurture campaign, an infographic, an invitation to a webinar. It took these 15 things over the course of 45 days to get them to the point where they were fully engaged and became a client. So then we could start to even do, predictive analytics in a whole new way. And one of the things that you'll hear from Salesfusion, particularly over the coming months, is this whole notion of getting predictive in figuring out who your right customers are. So predictive analytics is really where the next phase of this is going. We've got a lot of access to big data. We've talked about some of the ways that we can use this information in very practical ways. We've talked about some of the key metrics that most marketers need to be thinking about and tracking today. The next evolution, and what you'll see from Salesfusion if you follow us and you continue to come to our website or respond to our campaigns, is this whole notion of getting predictive in figuring out who your best customer is. That's the future of web analytics, marketing analytics, lead scoring, etc. It's all going to the point of helping you predict exactly what you need to do to get folks to convert. A couple of final thoughts. I know we're a little bit over the 30-minute mark, and I apologize for that. One-dimensional data. It's way too limiting. Marketing data alone is not going to help marketers optimize their spend. We need the sales data. Sales data alone doesn't tell the whole story either. It only tells the end of the story. It's like starting a book, a 3-chapter book at the 3rd chapter if you're only looking at sales data. We need both. And we need data from multiple dimensions and sources, web, social, forms, email, demographics, in order to paint the entire picture. So with that, we'll go ahead and stop the recording and